Hello and welcome to this session of FTT from wherever you're joining us today. I was told earlier we have about 1,000 registrants, 63 different countries, so hopefully convenient time zone for all of you. Well, other than my first job at BP Finance in 1988, when we were still using bank systems and Lotus 123, I've always used the TMS in my Treasury work. The systems, their functionality and processing speeds have all come a long way since I use software like IT2 and Richmond. And yet, despite all the challenges that users and vendors face, it's good to remember how far we have come. As the years progress, the requirements we place on TMSs grows. And for those either looking to move away from spreadsheet applications or replace existing ones, it can be hard to decide what the most cost-effective solution can be. Hopefully, shedding a bit more light on this, we have a couple of people who will share different points of view. One is a treasurer who will talk us through his journey so far, and I hope to share what comes next. And my other guest has implemented a number of different TMSs, from some of the cheapest on the market to some of the most expensive available, covering everything from implementation, upgrades, and support. As always, before we get going, a bit of housekeeping, audience Q&A. Please do send in questions. I love putting my guests on the spot. So please make them work for their time today. And please put them through as we go through. It makes it much more interesting for us and hopefully for you. A reminder, it's being recorded at the end of the day. It'll be available on the event platform for the next 14 days. If you like it, please encourage your friends and colleagues to watch it. My kids have basically given up when I tell them, but hopefully some of your friends and colleagues will find it useful. We do, as a reminder, have a discussion forum, so please engage on that. And a reminder, please engage with the ACT on our social media. We've got an active Twitter account at ACT Update and tweet using hashtag ACTFTT. Now, as always, a few introductions. For those of you that weren't here this morning, I am still Naresh Aggarwal. And after 30 years working in Treasury, I now provide policy and technical support here at the ACT. As a treasurer, I've worked with and implemented a number of different treasury solutions. And as an ex-consultant, I've also helped a range of clients either assess their existing treasury solutions or identify and implement a new TMS. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about the challenges and opportunities that these systems can offer. Joining us today, we have Phil Connell, who's a global treasury manager at Body Shop, and Diane Barker, who's an experienced treasury consultant. Phil, could you first of all introduce yourself and your company and share a bit about the team size and the areas of responsibility of your treasury function?
Sure. So I'm Philip Connell. I'm the Global Treasury Manager for the Body Shop International Limited, the ethical beauty brand founded in 1976 by Dame Anita Roddick. The Body Shop operates in over 60 countries globally and is a mix of approximately a third company-owned market and 2/3 franchise markets. The Body Shop is part of the Natura & Co group, which compromises the Body Shop, Avon, Aesop, and Natura. And for the Body Shop specifically, we're a centralized treasury function made up of about six people, responsible for FX management, cash flow forecasting, cash, liquidity, and debt management, including intercompany loans and in-house bank. So personally, I'm responsible for all front office operations and have been with the company for about 9 years, just over 9 years. During my time, I've had a number of positions at the Body Shop, front, middle, and back office within the Treasury team. While at the Body Shop, I've been involved in a number of projects, including the setup of a payment factory, global banking tender, in-house banking, intercompany financing, and TMS implementation. And I completed my MCT qualification in 2019. So, moving on to the TMS.
Yeah, no, it's that slow point of unmuting and muting, which I still can't get the hang of. So thanks very much, Phil, for giving us an introduction to the company. Tell us a bit about your experience with the TMS.
Sure. So I prepared a few slides, which hopefully you can see on screen now. So very quick recap. So about the Body Shop, very quickly, because we've just obviously gone through this. It was founded in 1976 by Daniel Roddick, operates in over 60 countries. We're a mix of franchise and company-owned markets. We're a beauty retailer with strong ethical values, and we're a centralized treasury function. So just setting the scene as to where we were with our TMS implementation. So at the Body Shop, we're in the process of changing ownership, and we did not know who our new parent would be, but we had to carve out all treasury operations within a very short period of time. This meant we went from having a bespoke in-house bank system to no TMS at all. Under the previous parent, we had a number of systems, a number of things like cash pooling, for example, across the world, but then it reverted back to manual structure. We had our in-house banking and intercompany financing from the parent. The new Body Shop structures had to be implemented. We had our FX dealt for us by the group previously, the need to introduce FX banking structures, FX lines, etc., and systems obviously to deal and record. So we started with telephone dealing and banking platform settlements, and there was no confirmation matching system at the beginning. I remember one of my colleagues standing for hours by a printer, signing and scanning documents to confirm all of our FX deals. Thankfully, we had a good base in some other areas. So we had, as part of our banking RFP, we'd managed to consolidate most of our cash management operations into one bank, where possible, setting up MT940 and MT101, where we didn't use that bank. So we were able to introduce our off-the-shelf TMS as a system of record in approximately 3 weeks, which was a very short for an implementation, but it did literally start as a system of record for all of our treasury transactions, mainly FX deals and intercompany loans. And over the past 4 years, we have continuously improved on our structure, culminating in the structure I will show you on the next slide. So this is the Body Shop final structure as of now. A couple of work in progresses, but this is it. So if we start on the right-hand side, you can see the external environment. So basically, in the external environment, actually, let me go back a bit. So on the right-hand side, we have the external environment. In the middle, we have the TMS. And on the left-hand side, we have the Body Shop environment. So 3 separate environments, just to put it into the picture. Starting on the external environment, we've maximized, so if we look at the top, on the right-hand side, at the bank, so we've maximized the connection we have with the one bank, who already had the MT940 from all the other banks, supply the bank statement and balances. And furthermore, we created a connection with that bank to perform treasury payments, all linked to the treasury management system workflow. Market data is linked to our TMS, and it automatically provides the FX rates and interest rates to be used within the system. We then have the trading platform connection, which is basically communicating automatically with the TMS to create the deal once it's traded in the platform. And that also, because we trade on behalf of our subsidiaries, that also can create the back-to-back element of the deal as well. We have a confirmation matching system, which can automatically communicate between the TMS and the confirmation matching system, which obviously goes off to the banks to confirm the deal and confirm everything was correct. IMEI reporting, so only for our internal trades, but the system produces a file which we can upload into the IMEI reporting. And finally, we're actually working on connecting the TMS to our head accounting system for treasury accounting and valuations. Currently, we upload a file. So then on the left-hand side, in the Body Shop world, we have a multi-factor authentication system for our users, and we're working on the SFTP connection with our ERP to feed accounting journals, FX rates to the ERP from the TMS, and feed elements such as cash forecasting information into the TMS, like AP, accounts receivable from the ERP. So a two-way feed. Then in the center of it all is the cloud-based SaaS TMS. So it accumulates all the information into one place for us to have group cash visibility, centralized group reporting, a group treasury system of record, centralized platform for treasury processes, automated and standardized deal flows, so dealing, confirmation, and settlement, and we'll go on to a few of these in a minute. Accounting journals for treasury transactions, in-house banking functionality, so recording cash concentration and pooling movement, and some intercompany payments, for example, in-house banking itself. Debt management, both internal and external, and the SOX controls are embedded within the workflows and the system controls. So what I thought I'd do next is I'd show you some of our flows. So this is an example of an automated deal flow we have for FX. So in the next couple of slides, you'll see the FX, and then we'll move on to loans. But for the FX, if we start on the very left-hand side, at the beginning, the trade information is uploaded into the dealing platform. The trade is then completed in the trading platform, and it automatically uploads into the TMS. And if it was a back-to-back deal, the back-to-back deal is created automatically, which is obviously saving us synergies there. So once it has gone through the necessary authorization, it will move to the confirmation, so the confirmation matching system, and the confirmation will be sent and automatically received from the confirmation matching system, and an acknowledgement will return if all is correct, and just tick a box. Then, once again, we will move to prepare the settlement, and basically from that perspective, the settlement is also prepared based on settlement defaults and goes once again through the necessary authorization checks, which finally leads to payment being sent via host-to-host connection with the bank. So moving on to the loans. So another example. We create the deals in the TMS. So I guess in terms of just going back a bit, for the loans perspective, we do financing from a central entity. So we create internal loans. And from that perspective, we create the deals in the TMS. It goes through the necessary authorizations, and the system will automatically send a confirmation to the internal counterparty, letting them know the details of the deal, the interest rate, the holding tax, all of those elements. Then we'll move to auto prepare the settlement, similar as before, and that will go to the necessary authorizations, and the payment will be sent by host to host to the bank. So in terms of some of the benefits, so we have an automated and standardized deal flows for multiple deal types. We've managed to accumulate time savings. So going back to my colleague who was standing by the printer, for example, with that, he was spending at least an hour, a couple of hours a week by the printer, signing and scanning and printing. And there's no need to do that now, because obviously the confirmation matching system takes care of that. And in terms of paying the payments, obviously we don't have to do two separate systems anymore. We don't have to enter it in the banking platform, and we don't have to enter it manually into the system. So the dealing system is automatically creating the deal, and then also the payment, it is obviously going through the system as well. So you don't have to actually create that payment detail inside a banking platform, because the TMS has all the details already. There's one system of record. It's our one-stop shop for our main treasury activities, and the internal controls are embedded within the system, so it cannot be circumvented. For example, there's dual control over static data, segregation of duty in the workflow, and all that sort of stuff. Audit logs, making it very easy to comply with SOX controls and audit requests. And then error reduction. Error reduction is obviously a big thing, removing that element of error. So for example, there is little that can really be input incorrectly now, as the deal follows a complete workflow with multiple authorization steps. And before this, when using manual uploads of the deals from the dealing platform to the TMS and manual payment in the banking system, well, there could be discrepancy between what you actually booked and what you actually paid. And then obviously that would have to be picked up in reconciliations. So that would have to be investigated and resolved. And with it being an automated workflow, that doesn't have to happen. And that the problem significantly reduced. Not saying there wasn't much on before. But reporting. So reporting is great. Say, for instance, now we have a report that sends automatically every day to inform the relevant people the cash balance or the net debt for the previous day. And obviously that can be set up for a number of reports, but it allows information to be received in a timely, correct and informative manner. So from my perspective now, this concludes my TMS presentation. So I'd like to thank you all for listening, and hopefully this was a useful experience for you all.
Thanks, Phil. And I was going to ask if, presumably, with all this time saving now and your colleague not having to stand by the printer, you sort of come in the morning, finish by lunchtime, and then home in time for Watch with Mother.
I wish, right? There's always other things to do. There's always other things to improve and continuously improve. So unfortunately not.
Well, that's thank you very much, Phil, for taking us through that sort of story. Diane, it'd be great to hear from you. I've got a few things to be, if you could cover. Great to hear a bit about yourself, some of the highlights and possibly some of the lowlights in your career. How you think Phil's experiences are typical of your own observations. I know you've worked with some of the sort of both ends of the spectrum in terms of the costs of TMSs. We could get your views around those, and also the sort of final question for me is really about how effective do you think they are around delivering transformation that we're always told they're capable of delivering? So hopefully you remember those 4 questions.
Thanks, Naresh. I may need a prompt. Thank you. So, afternoon, everybody. So, I have I discovered the world of corporate treasury during my time at Bank of America, and this enabled me to gain an enormous amount of knowledge in terms of global cash management, pooling, etc. This was all achieved through different ranges of different projects, and was also exposed to treasury systems, including IT2, as the help desk manager for something like 2 years. I then moved to a TMS vendor, SimCorp, who had purchased IT2. And in that particular role, I took on responsibilities of supporting multinational clients on the IT2 help desk. I then moved into 2 corporate treasury roles, firstly with Fujitsu Services and then BG Group as back office manager. And as usual in the world of treasury, I also had a range of projects to run, including TMS upgrades and also a bank migration. Next step was to SAB Miller, where there was a 5-year global project which was responsible for establishing 4 regional treasury centres and also transition to new bank partners. I was instrumental in establishing in the design of IT2 processes for the RTC model, and that included setting up commodity hedging for aluminium, given the amount of cans that are used for beer, and also managed subsequent pilots. I also worked in well, not literally worked in LATAM, I worked on a LATAM migration project, as well as supporting the RTC deliverables. I then moved over to OpenLink, another vendor. I was in implementation for FINDA TMS, which is used by large multinational corporates, banks, and government agencies, i.e. the top end of the market, as Naresh referred to just now. And my latest role is with a small consultancy company, Assurance Program Solutions. And that's given me the opportunity to take on various treasury consulting roles with companies such as Quilter, Phoenix, and CME. And the projects that have been included in there were an RFP and an implementation for TMS. Also, the implementation of a brand new trading application as well. So I've gone through the run of the mill in terms of treasury projects. It's either a TMS or it's a bank migration in the majority of cases. So Naresh, I do remember you kind of throwing at me hopefully highlights and lowlights, as we call them. I've been very focused on projects throughout my career, and I was thinking about how long I've been in the world of finance, and it's something like 14 years. So, but every high levels of highlights when a project, especially a really complex one, is successfully delivered. And it's important to learn from success, because when you go on to low light, if you like, it's the opposite of obviously when a project gets into serious trouble. I unfortunately had one of those type of projects, but the upside is to learn from that experience. So whichever way you go, learn and take on what you've learned. I think the other key things is I see myself as a highlight from a team player. I've been fortunate to work with very knowledgeable and professional teams. I sort of, especially at SAB Miller, so I'd like to actually say hello to all my former SAB Miller colleagues who are also, I've seen, are attending this event. On lowlights, things to do with projects, I've been made redundant 3 times over the years, and that can be very difficult to deal with. It did give me an opportunity to move into 3 alternative roles, which I may not have otherwise considered. But there can be an upside to redundancy, and it's given me the opportunity to sort of spread my wings into different areas. So,
that sounds that's a really interesting run through. And I guess in amongst those, when we reflect on Phil's experiences, how typical are those of clients that you either companies you worked with or worked for?
I think, well, certainly I've worked on a project which was a similar scenario to where Phil was coming from in terms of having to take on responsibility from group and to then implement a TMS. So I've say it is a challenge when you don't have the tools to do the job. The thing that I was most impressed about with what Body Shop's done is to get the TMS up and running within 3 weeks. And I think that the approach was sort of as a minimum viable product, I think is the phrase to use for that, where you get something working really, really quickly, which obviously happened in that 3 weeks, and then spend following months and years putting together all the other add-ons that need to be put in place based on prioritization. And to be honest, it's only the second time I've seen minimum viable product being used, get something working that quickly. I would actually recommend that for some businesses looking at taking on a TMS from where you're currently not using a TMS, is to perhaps take that approach to start giving you some immediate benefit and pay back on the money that's been spent getting the TMS. I can only compliment.
and I guess it's good to know what is potentially capable of being done. So certainly during this Festival of Financial of Treasury Transformation, we hear a lot of Treasury and software vendors talk about the time it takes, the planning, and we all know how important planning is up front, how long it takes to then deploy. And I guess that's what you can do when you have the luxury of time. And it sounds from what Phil was saying that sometimes companies don't always have that.
Absolutely. And I think that's the one thing I have experienced in my time within Treasury, for sure, especially in operation, having had 2 operational jobs, you never have time to do projects because the day job always takes precedence. And so in one of my roles, I was given a year to do a bank migration, and it ended up taking 2. Not just because I was too busy, there were a whole pile of other things flying around that caused problems. But I think it's having moved into a world where I could focus purely on a Treasury project, that means that you've got a much better chance of getting things delivered because you're not being dragged into the day job on a regular basis. So yeah, what I see more now is companies having to, the Treasury team having to manage those projects and deliver those projects. And I have seen examples where Treasury teams take on the implementation, but they don't have skills to manage it as a project, to try and preempt things that they can avoid, to have a reasonable project plan. And I would always recommend that even with a more straightforward short-term implementation, still keep sort of like the basics of how a project needs to roll out. You know, have a plan, know what your budget is. You know, make sure you're keeping stakeholders involved, which you can manage at the lower end of the cost of a TMS. But the minute you move into the large scale, like FINDA, that is, you know, by explaining who would use FINDA, they're using more complicated instruments like over-the-counter derivatives, commodities, that kind of thing, and they're also expecting to manage various other complexities, and part of which will undoubtedly be a migration from an existing application to then move on to another extremely large, demanding sort of implementation. And absolutely, you need to have a project manager there managing that process.
So Diane, just thinking about the difference between some of the smaller priced, some of the lower cost price software versus the sort of more expensive ones. And thinking again about cost effective, you know, powering Treasury with a cost effective TMS. Is the more money you pay, you get a bigger bang for your buck by doing that?
Well, not necessarily. So, and I think that's the key thing, is to get a look at. I mean, certainly when I looked at one of the RFP implementations that we covered off, the range of TMS was reviewed before even cutting down to a, you know, a really big list of different types of TMS that could be used, and they were broken down into, you know, very large, medium-sized, and small, you know, t-shirt size kind of thing. And it quickly became apparent which level the particular team needed to feed into. It also gives you an opportunity to see the diversity of content, as well as price, and that also gives you an idea of price. But also, the other key thing is are you actually going to get what you're expecting when you buy this product? How many times do you get, oh yes, this is going to be really great for you, and then it isn't. And that's not just TMSs I'm talking about. That's I think that's life in general. I think that, I mean, you know, obviously the more functionality, capacity, and those kind of things that you need to operate your bank, for example, is absolutely going to cost easily going into millions by the time you've factored in everything that you need to do over and above, you know, the internal costs of project teams, etc., as well as what you've got to pay the company, the vendor that's implementing. I think it's not, and also, of course, it's how much you're prepared to pay, and you get what you think you're going to have.
And so it sounds to me that, you know, I'm sure many people have come to this conclusion as well, that rather than trying to find a system that does all things in all situations, in all cases, but actually to boil down what are the most important things that you need. Is that, you know, from your experience, is that what you'd be recommending to people?
Not quite. So I think what you need to look at is, I mean, if you're going to implement a TMS, let's say a sort of medium, you know, mid-size TMS, you need to allow for growth and change within your companies. So in my view, you should have some sort of roadmap, maybe out 5 years, and then look at what you might need in 5 years' time, so that when you're still using this TMS that you've just selected, you're not constrained because you haven't realized you might need to do a bond issue or something, and you didn't have the capability to do that because you'd gone too far, you know, down to the sort of like the the less complex TMS. So yes, you need to be able to do what you want to do now, but you need to factor in what's coming, and that can be a challenge because obviously we don't know the future, and things always come out of the woodwork. But at least you've made that point, you've covered that point off.
Okay, super. I'm going to turn to Phil for a question, and we've got some questions coming in, but I'll turn to them in a minute. So one constant seems to be that no implementation is easy, and Phil, you've sort of shared, some really pretty slides, and I'm sure there were some things that didn't go quite to some of that plan. Could you share a bit about some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, sure. So I think, as I mentioned, the time to do it is always fun. Obviously, you've got your day job that you're doing, and then you've got to put in these projects on the side. So it's been a big work by the entire team, and they've put in the hours to get it done. They're saying that's always difficult to prioritize between the day-to-day and the project. In terms of the planning, totally important. Obviously, things do change. So that was a massive thing. But in terms of the specific requirements that I think that those specific challenges that we kind of hit, one was custom reporting. Reporting in the TMS never seemed to be exactly what you wanted. Like you could have your cash balance, you could have your debt balance, but you want it all together? No, we can't have that. And there's a custom report that you have to build to pull that all together, the multiple modules, the cash, the bank, the debt, the investments, you pull all into one, and you get your custom reporting. And obviously that's not just cash, the net debt balance, but I'm just using that as an example. And accounting was also a bit of a difficult piece to get right, as it's quite a labor-intensive process, or at least it was in our TMS. You had to enter it all within the test system, and enter it all in the production system. And also for us, I think that the GLs changed after a year because obviously further changes, so we had to redo it. I think one of the key areas I really feel is to get right is stakeholder buy-in across the business. Because I think Treasury can only do so much by themselves, and you need the teams such as IT to do things like connect to your ERP, because obviously you want information from your ERP in the TMS. And you need the wider finance team to ensure that the accounting is correct and it's useful as well for the business. So I think it's really important that people outside of Treasury understand that TMS has benefits outside of Treasury, and it's important to kind of communicate that to the wider business.
So I guess what I'm hearing here is that some of this is around influence and engaging with teams that maybe you did or didn't want to get involved in. I mean, how receptive were the IT teams to having this third-party software on their site?
So I mean, that's okay. I mean, when you go to SaaS, right, it's a different thing. You're not hosting, so it's all in the cloud. So that removes a lot of the complexity, at least from the IT team, and then it's all down to, I guess, from a security perspective, making sure IT are happy. And obviously then with the IT thing, you have to fit into the timeline of the IT department as well to ensure that you can have those connections to the ERP. So you have to let them know well in advance to then be in the queue as such.
And I guess this comes back to, I guess, some of Diane's point around a chunk of success in here is around just very effective project management.
Yeah. I mean, communication and effective project management and planning is important. As I said, there's only so much you can do. And
I mean, there are people who are great at Treasury and are rubbish at project planning. I think I'm one of those. I'm not sure about great at Treasury, but I'm definitely not great at project planning. Did you feel the need to just use the team that you had, or you looked at specific resource in some of these areas that maybe aren't natural for some Treasury folk?
So I think, at least from the body shop experience, obviously we used the consultants that were provided by TMS provider to obviously have the relevant training. And that was sort of during that initial stage, obviously, of creating that system of record. But as we moved along into our journey, we wanted to learn and know the system as much as we could, because we didn't always want to rely upon a consultant from the third party that we had to pay to implement something for us. We wanted to be able to do, I don't know, 80%, 90% of it ourselves, to then only bring them in when we needed them. So that's what we did. So then over the years, we did certain elements and added certain things in, but tried at least more towards the end of it to do as much as possible as we could by ourselves, rather than always asking the TMS consultant for help.
So, Dan, I guess you've got some thoughts on this.
Click on mute. Yeah, I think what the Body Shop's actually done by making sure that the Treasury team themselves were taking ownership of configuration and not forever hassling the TMS vendor is absolutely the right way to go. Again, with the experience that I've had in a number of companies who bring in a lot of contractors, and then the contractors walk away with all the knowledge, and you're left behind with hardly any knowledge of how to do anything. Especially in the configuration sense, it's not less of an issue when you're doing BAU tasks. To me, that's something that I think is absolutely critical. The Treasury team have to get hands-on with the TMS as soon as it's available, making sure that everybody knows what's going on, as I say, both in terms of configuration as well as putting in, making the best use of the TMS and the functionality that it does, etc., etc.
And I think certainly from my consulting experience, I've seen clients who have insourced some people to actually run the day-to-day operations and used their own team to actually then focus on the TMS implementation. Because frankly, the way in which you do cash management on a daily basis, you can farm out to a contractor, because that knowledge is pretty easy to pick up. But I definitely agree, Diane, that early on in this process, people need to think about what scope there is for resourcing it effectively, rather than, as it sounds like Phil, you had to do, which is, do your day job and then from 6 o'clock in the evening till 9 or something, to switch over to a sort of TMS implementation mindset and mode.
We obviously try to make a good work-life balance, so not to be that extreme, but yeah. I just I think one further thing to add around that as well, in terms of from the I guess the people like me knowing how to use the system, is don't get the consultant to change the interface for you, because if you change the interface, you always need the consultant to do it. So you need somewhere in the system that you can change yourself and know where to change without constantly saying, oh, I need you to change the interface to this, I need to change the interface to this, and then hard code things in. Obviously, you quickly become a cropper when you can't get it to work because there's something that someone's coded into the interface, and people to remember that is obviously very difficult.
Okay, that's a good tip.
Because the problem is that what happens is, these things don't get documented. I mean, historically in Treasury, we're not great at documenting our processes. So unless you can use a TMS to kind of give you that benefit, yeah, it's things like those interfaces where, if you make a complete mess of it, as you say, you come a cropper, Phil. So it's about documenting things as well, because obviously your team will change over time. So whoever had the experience leaves, you need someone else to be able to pick it up.
That's a good point. So Dan, in terms of, I don't want to spend the whole session talking about implementation, but it is a key part of getting value out of the TMS. Do you have any sort of do's and don'ts, not just the implementation, but even before then, the RFP, and we talked a bit about project management already?
So yeah, so I think certainly for me, key element is obviously getting your RFP out there, which focuses very much on what it is you're expecting from the vendor. So that can include functionality, but also how you want the RFP to actually work. And one of the things that I seen was making sure that once you've got to that sort of point where you've decided which TMS you want to use, then's the time to start digging down in a lot more detail into how this is all going to work, making sure the tech, the respective tech teams get have conversations about how the implementation is going to work, SLAs, all that kind of stuff. Some of the things I did find interesting was in one company, a procurement lead arranged a meeting with the vendor's senior management to assess cultural fit. And actually, as a result of that meeting, we didn't quite get the feedback that we had expected. And so after having had that meeting and scored it, a vendor was actually deselected overall, not purely because of this meeting with a senior manager. It actually did reveal quite a few interesting points that we weren't particularly happy about. I think also the other thing is I've seen implementations where the TMS chosen was perhaps not the right one in the end. And sometimes it may be, if you get to mid-implementation and you realize actually the TMS is the wrong fit, or there's problems with the quality of the consultants who are helping you to implement the TMS, don't be afraid to change your mind. Because for TMS, if you've got it for 5 years and from sort of 6 months in, it's not going to work for the next 5 years, actually, you need to at least think about changing your mind and starting again, because it's going to be less painful. But that's kind of a few things that are coming out of the RFPs and so on. Do not retain spreadsheets. Those are the devils. People like to give up their spreadsheets, but you need to use the TMS, as Phil's already said. It's a source of truth. And similarly, don't try and replicate a spreadsheet in a TMS without at least considering different ways of doing it. You want to take advantage of what you can or can't do in the TMS, especially when it comes to reporting. Other things I've seen happen: don't rush into doing static data design. Make sure you understand the end-to-end process. I'm aware of static data being set up 3 times in an implementation, so you don't want to get into those kind of pickles. I would also say don't configure a TMS to perform anything that's bespoke when you're working with a cloud implementation, because the minute an upgrade comes along, your particular piece of bespoke process isn't going to be guaranteed that it will actually work after the update. So that is definitely not recommended to do. So testing, don't have a test plan that absolutely covers everything, because you're never going to be able to implement that test plan because you won't have the time and the resources. So just focus on what's the risk of something failing. If it's critical for go live, make sure you test it. If it's not critical for go live, don't worry about it after you've gone live. Those are the kind of things that I've kind of thought around over and above just pure implementation. Right.
Okay, super. We've got some questions coming in now, and I sort of want to turn to those. The first question, the one that's got the most votes, is really around building a business case. I was going to turn to you, Phil, first. You talked a lot about the qualitative benefits, not standing next to a photocopier and just photocopying stuff. But when it comes down to pounds, shillings, and pence, what are the sort of benefits that people here thinking about putting their own business case can actually think about, given what you've seen?
So I think obviously from our situation, it was a little bit different. It was a must. Obviously, we were replacing, so it was part of it had to happen. So the business case would have been a bit different. But we are currently expanding certain things as a group with our TMS, and obviously a business case had to be created for that. So I think that a lot of the time it's more the qualitative side and then the management reporting. So for example, if you can say to your group finance director that you're going to get a cash report and it's going to be every day and here you go automatically, and they've got visibility over the balances, that's a huge thing. It's amazing how many people don't have that, in other companies. It's crazy. And even just from a simplicity perspective, obviously, I'm trying to find the quantitative side. I guess the quantitative side is really the time saving and the fact that you can devote to other areas of the business that extra time. So obviously, the TMS is a cost, but that's the whole point of finding a cost-effective TMS in the first place. And as a treasurer, I think it's your responsibility to try and sell this to the business and as to what it can give. Because as I've mentioned before, it's not just the Treasury system. It can provide other things to the business, the group reporting, the SOX controls. Obviously, I mean, you could be using spreadsheets. I'm sure many people are using spreadsheets. And we all know the difficulties around that in terms of locking them down, audit logs, and just errors. And generally, only a few people know how to use them. So, you know, I think that the cost, you have to weigh up what's the risk of an error versus what's the risk of basically using the system. So it's more of a, I guess, a what if scenario, because obviously it's a cost at the end of the day, isn't it, that you didn't have before. But it's about improving what benefits are going to be for the organization in that remit, especially if you're a SOX organization, for example. It's a must.
So do you think, and I'm going to turn to you, Dan, but do you think trying to build a quantitative business case that actually generates a positive financial return on investment is probably almost impossible, too difficult to achieve?
I think that in addition to sort of like the quantitative areas that had sort of put into the case, I think it's also important to factor in those that you just cannot quantify, sort of like a value. It's like an intangible benefit, and those are the sort of things where things like standardization of a process across the company or across the group in itself, you can't measure that. It's obviously something that you want. Things like managing your risk across the process, to sort of have that ability to manage that over and above at a more detailed level, things like reports. So that would feed into a lot of areas. The other thing, and being a single source of truth in itself is an intangible benefit, because you don't realize how much time is spent going between other applications. And whilst and things like controls, security, all those other kind of things, improved technology, all of those kind of things should be fed into that case, because it's supplementing the monetary side of it by putting in some things that absolutely a company or a group would definitely appreciate, especially coming from from those who have no TMS, or they have a TMS that doesn't actually deliver some of those benefits. Those will actually help swing a lot of these things, because the key stakeholders will have kind of, okay, yeah, there's the money, but actually I value this intangible benefit more than the cost of the TMS. So I think those two combinations will give you a better chance for your money.
I think I've just to add to that, I think I've seen some organizations looking at time and effort saved by not keying in data, by having information that is being automatically extracted, by not having to call banks, for instance, to do FX, but using automated platforms like, Phil, you were talking about. The reality is, I guess, you don't save the people and the headcount. They just get given more things to do or more projects to get engaged in. So I guess what I'm hearing is that it sounds like we can't get away from the fact that a lot of the benefits are around the controls, are around the confidence that it provides to senior management, the confidence it provides to a treasurer that what they're reporting or being given is actually, we've all had this phrase, and you've used it already today, single source of truth. And any other sort of savings that we may make on bank charges, FX rates, share of wallet analyses, these are all probably secondary, still valid, but I think it's going to be challenging to find that anything you put into buying a TMS and the implementation costs is going to be outweighed by savings, unless you've got a really, your starting point is really expensive cost base. I'm going to turn to another question. So Phil, now you've implemented TMS, presumably you don't use Excel for the execution of treasury related tasks, workflow, reporting, analysis, or anything else, correct?
So depends on the process, right? I think it's very hard to get away entirely from spreadsheets. So obviously in the processes that I mentioned, yes. So obviously dealing FX and all that sort of stuff, you can get away from it and all those flows. But in terms of certain items, like for example, like we do like a weekly cash report to look at like kind of what we're going to need in the following week. But we take data from our ERP as well as the TMS. So obviously at the time being, we don't have the ERP and the TMS combined. So that data is not feeding automatically. But once it feeds automatically, then I can use the TMS. So I think, okay, you're never 100% going to get away from spreadsheets, but you can get rid of them quite a bit. I mean, it's just all about creating those integrations between systems to create that one system of record. So the TMS has that information, because if the TMS doesn't have it, then you can't use it. I think that's the key thing, really. But yeah, you're never going to get away entirely from spreadsheets. So, like for example, from our perspective, we didn't particularly like the way that our system could hold guarantee data, for example. So we used the banking platform for that, but actually we also hold spreadsheet too, because we didn't like the way it went in. But there's obviously, that's part of the process of moving forward. The way that we're looking to go forward is potentially to hopefully remove spreadsheets even more than they are, but also look at adding other systems and other links, like we saw in that presentation slide that had all those nice links to them, adding more of those links. And I guess kind of like a bit of a best of breed system where you're taking a bit of this and a bit of that to try and remove those elements entirely, because as we said, spreadsheets are not an auditor's or a treasurer's best friend by any means.
Okay, great. And Diane, I see you nodding a lot. Anything to add to Phil's thoughts on, the use of Excel? I mean, have you come across in your experience an organization that has pretty much moved away completely from spreadsheets?
No, people are so wedded to spreadsheets, and I'm not saying this of Phil in the Body Shop, but also kind of keep them out of, for ease, rather than putting the demand into the TMS, and that to me is where it's wrong. If you can generate a report from the TMS, you absolutely should not be using a spreadsheet. It's only the exceptions where you can't get what you need. Yes, with during a number of implementations, there have been more battles over spreadsheets than anything else. It'll happen eventually. It won't necessarily be Excel, it'll be another application, which name I can't remember, but there's a number of other applications doing similar things or better things than Excel. Who knows, they may take over rather than Excel, but it's a bit like saying you don't have paper going over your desk anymore in the future. Well, how long has that taken to happen, Naresh?
And I'm going to pick on one of the words you used, by exception, and I guess this is the key challenge: is that not to assume you go from using Excel spreadsheets to no spreadsheets, but actually part of what you were saying, Phil, I've taken away that the data should be sitting in the TMS in one way or another. And maybe the answer is, if you're doing a back of an envelope calculation, that's fine in a spreadsheet, because it may take you 5 minutes rather than creating a whole new report out of a TMS. But if they are business critical and things that are used frequently, then there has to be a mechanism, characteristic, because a lot of this is human behavior, I guess, to encourage and then to force people to use a system where it's business critical. I've got a question here around level of experience and expertise. So again, this one's for you, Phil. You mentioned you have 6 people working Treasury. Does everyone get trained to a similar level in using the TMS? Or do you have a couple of sort of super users and the rest are, I'll use it if I have to?
So basically, when I started with the TMS about 4 years ago, I was a complete novice. I'd never used a TMS before, apart from the group one. Was very much learning from the TMS provider as to how to do these things. But then obviously through, and that's kind of thank you to my manager for supporting me through this, and obviously all that sort of great jazz. But I was allowed to learn, and now I feel like I know the TMS as much as I can, to be honest. But I think from our perspective, yes, I mean, naturally there's going to be a couple of people who know the system better, but that's because they've integrated, they've done the setup, and that they've used it more. But the whole point is, at least within the body shop treasury, everybody uses the TMS. So because they're all involved some point in the flow. So depending on their level of experience, and that's the whole point of, I guess, pulling them in. We try and pull them into the conversation. So when they're seeing, when something's new, try and have a few people there. So if one of us did, unfortunately, as I say, something happened to one of us, someone else also knows how to do it. So I mean, everybody uses it is the key thing, right? But yes, you're always going to have differing level of experiences in terms of using the TMS, but everybody learns, and everybody gets to that same point. It's about having the opportunity and wanting to learn.
So do you think, just ask a quick question, do you think it's a good idea to have a designated super user, everyone else learning, and the super user is someone you turn to, or should everyone be encouraged to be a super user?
So not everyone being a super user. You should have at least at least the one or two people that know everything inside out, really. Well, it has to be two, because what if something happens to that one person? But at the same time, those other users, they can't be super users, because you don't want, I guess, too much detail is too much sometimes. Like, if everyone knew all that, then you could compromise the system as well. So it's a bit of a balance, right? You want a couple of super users, and obviously you have all the controls in place, and only a couple of administrators and stuff like that to minimize all those risks.
Okay, super. Diane?
Yeah, I agree not to have too many super users, and definitely more than one for obvious reasons. And I mean, depending on the size of the team, you probably want somebody who's kind of guru for front office, another one for middle office, and another for back office, and and sort of sharing it out across. I mean, in the past, I've been responsible for managing and supporting systems within when I was at FTSE Services. That was one of my key roles, was making sure that things worked, and I was probably the super user in the whole team, which was not good, because obviously I was the only one, so fortunately other people volunteered to help, but yeah, definitely more than one, and as Phil says, covering off.
I'm conscious we've got just 2 or 3 minutes. I've got one question here I want to ask, and then I'm going to ask you both for one final thought, bringing us back to the question. Diane, Tableau, another sort of data visualization tools. Are you seeing a lot more use of these bits of software?
So you mean things like, oh, hang on, no, I'm on now.
Yeah, Power BI, Tableau.
Yes, I was thinking. Well, I was thinking of primarily APIs and all the new functionality coming through thanks to artificial intelligence activities. And we've obviously heard about those already during the course of the last day or so on what's achievable with AI. APIs are also helping to build an interface in a much more flexible and approach to facilitate moving data, transforming data from one platform, moving it into another. I mean, those are absolutely I'm sure will be covered off by some of the other presenters around what's going on in the world of APIs.
So there's one question, and we are going to go slightly over, but there is one I want to ask. We've heard from you, we've heard from other people during this week, the importance of tech and data, etc. Does this mean that the traditional roles are gone now, and what you need to be in Treasury is a tech expert? Almost yes or no, Phil?
I think no, but I think you need to know about it. You have to keep it on your radar. So because of time, I won't expand anymore, so that Diane have a shot at it too.
I think you should have somebody in the world of Treasury who understands the technology, because if you don't define the specs for what that tech needs to do because you don't understand Treasury, then you risk getting the wrong thing delivered, and that's purely because Treasury is very niche.
Okay, super. Yeah. So final wrap up, 30 seconds each. Phil, I'm going to turn to you first because you're off mute.
Sure. So I think basically, in terms of cost-effective TMS, you have to really figure out what you want to pay and what compromises you can make. I mean, you could throw as much money as you wanted at a bespoke system and do probably everything you could ever dream of, but is it really what you need? And there's always a compromise between an off-the-shelf solution and other solutions. I think most businesses could potentially live with the compromise. And a TMS, obviously, just reiterating, a TMS is a useful tool, not just for Treasury, but obviously for outside of Treasury. And management reporting is obviously at your fingertips.
Super. Diane?
Yeah, make sure that once you've got your TMS that you continue to use any new features that come along, especially where you've not necessarily had the opportunity to deliver those during your original plan. So don't just stop, using new things.
That's brilliant. Well, we've definitely reached the end of our time, and I hope with the help of Phil and Diane, we've given you some insights on either your existing TMS or if you're only just starting out on the journey. A few quick reminders. The event is being recorded, and like all the other sessions, you'll be able to watch it at the end of today for another 14 days. Please feel free to continue the discussion on our discussion board. Please, we continue to encourage you to provide feedback. It really helps us. Final, thank you, Phil and Diane, again, for sharing your experience and insights, and to the audience today. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks very much, everyone.